Hi, and welcome to the Peace Team's webinars on contextual safeguarding approaches to safeguarding adolescents. My name is Fazana Wangde Mohammed, and I'm one of the outreach workers. This webinar will be focusing specifically on peer group assessments. If you are new to contextual safeguarding, please watch the webinar giving the foundational knowledge on this school of thought. This webinar will only focus on the peer group element on contextual safeguarding. During this webinar, we will look at the definition of a peer according to contextual safeguarding, why this approach recommends looking at peers and peer groups, the parameters of the peer group assessment. We will also look at how to conduct contextual safeguarding peer group assessments, and finally how to conduct peer group mapping. Contextual safeguarding is a phrase coined by Colleen Furman in her work researching harm from outside the home. There are several spaces where adolescents can experience harm outside the home. This webinar will be focusing on peer groups and associations. It will look at ways to identify and assess harm that can emerge from peers. Firstly, what is a peer? In order for someone to be seen as a peer, there must be some sort of relationship between the young people. They must be roughly around the same age. Age becomes quite an important assessment tool in considering whether a relationship between two peers is harmful, especially when considering whether a child is being exploited. There could be a social, romantic, or familial connection. Something must link them together. For example, this could be a school or a youth club or an incident. For example, young people who were all at the scene of a stabbing may be linked by their presence at that event. They may be self-selecting, or they may live in the same neighborhood. Normally, the word peer implies parity or equality in their relationship. However, for the purposes of safeguarding, it is relevant to look at the power dynamics of peer relationships, as they may be the root of harmful or risky behavior. Though we can presume that peers would be the same age, often having just older peers can be a clear sign of safeguarding concerns. Traditional child and families assessments look at family and environmental factors, parental capacity, and a child's developmental needs. Contextual safeguarding argues that we need to consider peers due to the significance of their role in influencing adolescents in terms of risk-taking behavior and their exposure to potential harm. If professionals look at peer groups, it can be helpful in developing a broader understanding of the influences on the younger person, what they are doing when they are not at home, and locations that they might be found. When looking at a group, vulnerabilities in other members may also reflect on that young person. If other peer group members are open to services, it can be useful to create links with those professionals. A key point to remember is that as a professional, you are with the young person for a limited amount of time, perhaps 1 hour a week. Peers are ever present in their environment, through their phones and on social media. What are we looking for? In assessing a peer group, there are 3 key areas that Colleen Furman has identified. Look at the strengths of the peer groups. Often, when young people link up or associate with each other, there may be some relationships that are stronger than others. Though traditional views may be to break a relationship, split the group up at school, there may be something really important that they are getting from each other. Are there any weak relationships that are worth building on? Influence. It is vital to identify the origin of influence in each peer group. Who calls the shots? Who's making the decisions? Whatever the group looks like, young people will be receiving some sort of value from this group. It's important to identify what this is. In some of our cases, it has been something as simple as food or accommodation. In other cases, it might be money or a sense of belonging. The parameters of a peer group assessment. The nature of a peer group assessment will require services to stretch their access to information to young people, other than the cases open to themselves. The contextual safeguarding researchers have reflected on this sharing of information and investigated whether it could be considered to be breaking confidentiality. They sought legal advice, and it was affirmed that firstly, the intention of completing the assessment must be made clear, i.e., that sharing of personal information across agencies is only for the purposes of protection of health. This process cannot take place for the purposes of collecting information for facilitating a criminal investigation. How to conduct a peer group assessment. Here are the steps to completing it. Get as much information as possible from the direct work you complete with young people. Check databases, collaborate with other agencies that are involved with your young person and their peers. For example, schools, youth clubs, youth offending services. Work through the peer group assessment triangle. Conclude. Develop and assign actions. This is the peer group assessment triangle. The following slides will look at each area in a little bit more detail. Group functioning. What is the identity behind this group together? Is it postcode? Do they have a name for their group? Is it based on an activity that they do together? How does this group regulate emotions? For example, if one of their group has been attacked, does that make them scared, angry, vengeful? Who is looking after each of these group members? What is their home life like? What are each of their social relationships? Who has the most influence in the group? Guardianship is really important. How does this group stay safe? Who do they trust in the local community? Do their parents know each other and do they communicate? Are there other people in the community that have the capacity to safeguard? Environmental. How safe is their neighborhood where they live or where they hang out? Is everyone at risk in this area? Are only young people at risk in this area? Are the parents integrating into the community? Have they been placed in this area as a result of emergency housing? Do they speak the language? What are the policies governing that area? Borders are good examples of looking at this. For example, if they belong to one borough but hang out outside another borough's youth club, is it because the policy only allows those who live locally to access it? Does the environment have adequate resources in this area? CCTV, police patrol, shops, local businesses. The peace team reviewed one particular estate which had no local amenities within reasonable walking distance. Systemic factors. What opportunities are available to this location? Peer groups, poverty, lack of opportunity, youth sessions, health accessibility, poor lighting, access to bus routes, or green space. This case study is looking at a real peer group that the peace team assessed. We will call them L and E to keep them anonymous. At the point of referral, L had been raped in the local park by an adult she had asked to purchase alcohol for her from the local off-license. There were several instances of harm that L and E had been exposed to for the duration of their friendship. Both were school refusers. The assessment included peace workers, social services, parents, and police officers. Actions that arose from this analysis were L and E were enrolled into an alternative provision that focused on sports-based interventions with workshops based on life choices and consequences. Parents were supported to attend the non-violence resistance group and encouraged to carry on communicating. Drug intervention was put into place with L. Both L and E received one-to-one support from peace outreach workers. The next 4 slides will look at another important tool in contextual safeguarding called peer mapping. We will look at the process of planning, stages, and go through a real example. Have you identified a list of persons linked to the issue, peer group, location of concern? Are there any environmental contexts? For example, school, neighborhood, locations highlighted by the information. Have key contacts in relation to these young people and contexts. For example, practitioners, youth workers, school safeguarding leads, police officers, housing wardens being identified. Are there any contexts or young people identified who are already subject to contextual safeguarding or peer mapping? Have key questions been identified in relation to each young person, or context or vulnerability, as to how they relate to the network being mapped? It is really important to bear in mind that mapping is only true on the day when recorded, as relationships are fluid and dynamic. Peer mapping. Session 1, you would look at an internal mapping of information with names, locations, and incidents. Identify any gaps of information and identify key partners to inform those gaps. Session 2, identify and invite key partners externally, such as police, education, health, third sector, housing, licensing. Identify intervention gaps and safeguarding actions. At the review stage, you would review any existing actions, review the current map and update where needed, and carry on identifying gaps and any further actions that need to take place. You can then close the peer group when the actions are complete. Example of the mapping. This is a mapping that was completed for a peer group of concern. It has been anonymized. The title for the mapping is the Woodland Estate Mapping for the incident with a firearm on the 1st of January 2016. Mark out the incident that took place. Group young people with connections together. Use a key to demonstrate connections or other symbols used to show services or vulnerabilities. Keep all entries relevant. By this we mean that make sure they relate to the incident or the young people involved. You will notice that we've used a key on the side to help identify some key areas of interest to professionals regarding this case. Of course, this can change on a case-by-case basis. For example, names of schools or the name of a gang, if this is relevant. The incident is detailed in the box in the center. This mapping exercise was helpful in identifying all the agencies involved with this group and instrumental in working with police to disrupt relationships where appropriate. It was also helpful in engaging groups into community-based activity, and it helped to instigate a neighborhood assessment. I hope this has been a webinar that's helped to look at how peer group assessments could be conducted with contextual safeguarding in mind. Please take a look at other peace webinars and countless resources on the Contextual Safeguarding Network. Colleen Furman has also published reports and the book mentioned here, Contextual Safeguarding and Child Protection, Rewriting the Rules. Thank you for watching.